Hello, everyone. My name is Charles, and I work at Maryland Public Television. First of all, we hope you enjoyed MPT's Friday Freeview. We have done these very often, and this is a very special screening. And the actual documentary will start on Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. But for this part of the program, I'm going to be asking many of the people who you see on the screen here about their memories of Muhammad Ali and how the film came together. So the one thing I want to let you know is that if you have a question, you're able to put it in the chat function, and then someone will relay that to me, and then I will begin to ask the various guests on the screen about their memories and what they did in making this film. So before we get started, I want to introduce our guests. First of all, one of the individuals here is I'm sorry, I'm reading too many screens, and it's really messing me up. So Sarah Burns and David McMahon are the filmmakers of are part of the filmmaking group that put together Ali. They will get an opportunity to tell you how they did all of that. Harold is also one of our guests. He was one of the voices heard in the recent Showtime boxing documentary, The Kings, Hearns, Leonard, Duran, and Hagler. He is a 2020 National Association of Black Journalists Pioneer Award winner. He has interviewed Muhammad Ali many times, and he has some great stories, and I'm hoping we can get to some of those as we're doing it. So let me begin with you, Harold Bell. Let's talk about Muhammad Ali and what he meant to so many people who just knew him as a boxer, but he was more than that, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a great human being, man. When I first met him in 1967, on Howard University, I was working in Washington, D.C. with at-risk children and youth gangs in the streets. And my buddy Petey Green, a legendary radio, television talk show host here in D.C., caught me in front of Biz Chillibo. He said, man, Muhammad Ali is up on Howard University campus. I said, what? I said, come on, let's go. He said, no, man, I got a meeting with the boss. So I walked up to Howard University, and I saw all these kids, man, young folks, man, it must have been hundreds of them. And in the middle was Muhammad Ali. They were outside, they were outside on the building. So I walked up and I eased my way up till I was almost nose to nose with him. So he was talking on. He talked about 30 minutes. And then he said, I need somebody to take me on a tour of the campus. Well, he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to one of them pretty little girls. And I grabbed him. I said, come on, champ, come on, go with me. And we decided to walk down the Georgia Avenue corridor down to the famous Howard Theater. And as we're walking down, I turn around, man, it looked like a parade is following us. And so he was talking and making fun. And all of a sudden, cars start stopping in the middle of the street, and women started jumping out, going over and kissing him. And he was just having fun. He was having a ball, man. He was so comfortable around his people. He wasn't scared of his people. And we walked all the way down to 7th and T, where Howard Theater is located, and he started shadowboxing with some guys. And man, he just kept it real. And this was my first time meeting him, man. And I didn't see him again for 5 years. 5 years, I didn't see him again, man. And that's when I started my radio show, Inside Sports, in 1972. And then my friend Harry Barnett, who was the first, who represented George Foreman when he left the Olympus, who was my attorney, and a guy by the name of J.D. Bethea, a columnist for the Washington Star. They said, Harold, come on and ride with us, man. We're going to go to Cleveland. Muhammad Ali is doing the exhibition. So I went and told my wife, I said, man, Hattie, I'm going with you. I said, I'm going on to Cleveland. I'm going on with Harry and J.D. Bethea. And this what blew my mind. When we walked into the hotel where they were, where all the boxing people were headquarters, Muhammad Ali, there he was again, holding court with the media. And he looked and saw me, and he said, Harold Bell, what are you doing this far away from home? I almost fell out. I ain't seen him in 5 years, man. And that was the start of a beautiful relationship, man.
Thank you, Harold. We appreciate that. Let me go to you, Sarah. What was the most interesting thing in putting this material together that you found?
Well, part of this, it's such a big undertaking to try to do this whole sort of comprehensive portrait. And so we spend more than 5 years in production, and a lot of that is digging around in archival material and trying to find stuff that nobody's seen before, trying to find stuff that will help us understand Ali better. And of course, he was so well documented. He was, of course, never shy with the cameras. And so there's an extraordinary amount of archival material of him speaking his mind. And so we get to really know him through that material. There were a couple of finds that our producer, Stephanie Jenkins, who did some incredible work digging around in the archives to find stuff, was able to discover, including what's in the film, which is a 16 millimeter color footage of the Thrilla in Manila that had never been transferred before, never seen before. It's up close. It's right on the apron. It's this incredible footage. And it had basically been rescued by an archivist from being abandoned by a production company. It would have just been thrown away. And so there's some amazing stuff like that you've seen that fight. You've never seen it like this. So that's been a really fun part of this process.
David, I want to ask you about how Muhammad Ali, over the ages, literally, how he transformed, and some of that you captured on film. Were you able to see visually how the changes happened, or was it just through how his psyche changed?
Well, I can answer that in a couple of ways. Certainly in the ring, as a young man, before his exile, before he met Harold, he relied on his incredible speed, right? And so boxers are not taught to lean back to avoid punches. He would lean back. He could figure out exactly how far a competitor could throw a punch, and he would never get hit. And you see that in the film. There's this extraordinary color, 16 millimeter. I love the footage of his fight against Terrell or his fight against Williams. You just see an athlete at the absolute height of his powers. He can punch and land a punch anytime he wants, and he can void anything that anybody is throwing at him. Flash forward beyond the exile, he's a little slower, and he has to use a little more wit and a little more strategy. And as Harold knows, that fight against Foreman, he used the rope-a-dope. That's not what he was counseled to do by his corner, by his trainers. But he tired George out. He let him punch him and punch him. And you can see him absorbing all these blows, but he had a strategy. And so he's smarter, he's wiser, he's slower. And so that's one evolution you see. There are a few others. Let me talk about one. As Ali was coming up as a pro, he was very braggadocious. He wins his first 19 fights before he faced Liston. After every one, he tells you he's the greatest. Before every one, he tells you how many rounds it's going to take for him to knock the guy down. He's always right. He's telling people how pretty he is. He's doing exactly what Joe Louis's handlers told Joe never to do. And he is both at a time of great transformation in the country and riding the crest of that wave, and he's also doing the transforming, right? After he beats Liston, he comes out and he says, I don't have to be that guy anymore. I'm free to be who I want to be. I'm free to think what I want to think. I don't have to be who you want me to be. And so there's another transformation you see. And there's a lot behind that. While he was on this rise towards this heavyweight title fight against Liston, he was secretly a practicing member of the Nation of Islam. But he didn't want that to be public because he was sure that the Boxing Association would quickly make sure he didn't get a shot at the title. After he wins, he's public with that. And shortly after that, he goes from being Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. So there's another transformation. We see many transformations. I could name more, but I think Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay Muhammad Ali, always stayed true to his principles. And so he was the same guy right across all of those years. And we come to him, we catch up with him. He knows we should not be in Vietnam. He's comfortable as a member of the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam changes, but people start to see that he was right. He was right about the Vietnam War. He was right to be free to practice whatever faith he wanted to. And so it is a story of transformation, and it's a story about staying true to your principles.
Harold, I want to come to you, but I want to just remind both David and Sarah, back in the day, we would call that selling wolf tickets. And if you can't back it up, Harold, tell them, people would have discounted you, wouldn't they?
There's no doubt about it. And you hit it on the head, man. That was selling wolf tickets, man. and if you couldn't handle yourself, it's best that you don't sell wolf tickets. There were a lot of great athletes, man, who like to talk. And we've learned all of this on the playground because we were very competitive. And we would talk, that kind of stuff to each other. And Muhammad Ali brought it into the ring, man. We had never seen it in the ring before. And man, the one thing I like to say, is that David, is that here we had our first 3 heavyweight champions were all beautiful black men. I'm talking about Jack Johnson. You look over my shoulder, you see Joe Louis, and then Muhammad Ali. All of them were handsome men, man, and felt good about themselves. But like you said, Charles, Joe Louis was warned by his people, do not act like Jack Johnson, please. And that was, Joe, of course, he went along with what they had to say, but 3 great black champions, man, that represented us.
Well, I want everybody to know that this is not the very first film about Muhammad Ali. In fact, I want to go through some of the more popular culture films that have been made. The first one is The Greatest, which starred Muhammad Ali. And most people don't remember this, but I remembered it quite well. The title track was sung by George Benson, and it was called The Greatest. But guess what? Our audience probably knows it as the song that Whitney Houston did. And that was one of her signature songs. In addition to that, a lot of people probably got more intimate knowledge of Muhammad Ali from Ali, which starred Will Smith. And that particular film gave us an insight into both his training and gave us the famous chant, "Boombaye, Boombaye." And that was, I had heard the chant. I had no idea what it means, but I think it now, the translation is "kill him." and that was quite interesting. There is a current film that is out there. It's called Malcolm and Ali, Blood Brothers, which is on Showtime. But I venture to say that this will give you more insight than you have ever seen about Muhammad Ali. Now I want to talk about 2 other little things. First of all, there are 2 famous pictures of Muhammad Ali. The first is the Sonny Liston fight. My son, who I didn't even know anything about Muhammad Ali, has a T-shirt of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. And guess what he's saying? Say my name, because Liston would not call. He kept calling him Cassius Clay. And he said, that ain't my name. And literally he knocks him out. And there he is, laid flat on the canvas. The last picture, I think, for my generation, is the most moving picture of all. It was taken in Cleveland. It includes Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown. He was still Lou Alcindor. He had not changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Russell. I want to talk about this, Harold. That was a big deal because at that point, Black athletes were not trying to be political, at least not on the surface. And them coming together kind of, I don't want to say change the game, but, in today's parlance, the owners would say, shut up and dribble. But this group was like, no, we're not going to have that anymore. Explain those times, if you will.
Yes, it's, that was a group of that was Black Power. You want to talk about Black Power? That was Black Power that was in that room with Jim Brown, Lou Alcindor, Bill Russell, Bobby Mitchell. I mean, these were guys who surrounded themselves and came out to support Muhammad Ali. And the driving force behind that was Jim Brown. Jim Brown was able to call all these guys together, and they came out and say, hey, champ, we got your back. And that was one of the things that really pick Muhammad Ali up. That not that he needed to be picked up, but man, to know that these guys were behind him in anything that he did, and man, that today is still a fantastic and a classic photo of Black Power.
Sir, I want to ask you this question because a lot of people know that Muhammad Ali was one of the first most prominent African Americans to say, I am not going to go to Vietnam. Tell me that part of that evolution of Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, he was, he had initially been classified as 1Y, not eligible for the draft. And in 1966, they essentially changed the requirements. And so he became classified as 1A kind of overnight. And his reaction to that was frustration, was anger. And he met with Elijah Muhammad, and he quickly came out and explained why he didn't want to go. And he said, I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. And that comment reverberated, and it made a lot of people angry. And then a year later, first in that period, for a while, he couldn't get a fight in the United States, right? Because of the anger about him making that statement. And that was a time when the war in Vietnam was still quite popular in America. And a year later, in 1967, he actually refuses induction after trying and applying for conscientious objector status and being denied. He refuses induction when he's called, and he is immediately stripped of his title, thrown out of boxing, refused a license, his passport confiscated, and convicted of draft evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison. And he was, I think, clear-eyed about that and what he was doing and making that decision. And he had as his model Elijah Muhammad, who had gone to jail for refusing the draft himself during the Second World War. And there's this amazing moment where he says that he will, not only he's prepared to go to jail, and he was, but that he says he would go before machine gun fire tomorrow if he had to, before he would abandon his religion. And what's really extraordinary is just how much he was willing to give up for his faith, for his principles. And he did. He was out of boxing for 3.5 years, though he didn't know at the time that he would ever get to come back. He was prepared to give up his career, and he was prepared to go to jail. And of course, as Dave was saying before, when he does eventually come back, he's a different fighter. He has really lost something. He's given up those 3.5 years in the prime of his career, and he's given up his incredible speed. He's not the same fighter. And so it's just, we think about these athletes today who are using their platforms, who are refusing to shut up and dribble, as you said. And it's amazing. And they're all on Ali's shoulders because of that example that he set and what he was willing to give up and the courage that he displayed. It's really inspiring.
David, I want to talk about that period.
Charles,
Go ahead, Harold.
Let's say that what really teed people off is Muhammad Ali said, them Viet Cong ain't never called me nigger. And that really teed people off.
Yeah, he did eventually say that. Yeah, I mean, he said extraordinary stuff. He said, I'm not going to go 10,000 miles away to shoot and kill Black, poor brown people on the other side of the world when I'm not, I don't have my rights at home. I mean, he was this was a religious stand that he was taking, but he was also making a political point. And he made it really powerfully. And he went around during that exile, as you know, when he was visiting Howard, I'm sure he was talking about this. He was explaining that. He was explaining his faith and what it meant to him and the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And he was explaining his anti-war stance. And more people came around to understanding that he was right about the war. But he was out ahead of that in a way that not many people were talking about at the time.
Hey, David, I want to ask about during this period, one of the things, he was trying to make money, and he went down to Philadelphia and he talked to this guy named Joe Frazier, and Frazier actually gave him some money.
Yeah.
But then as he was coming out, he basically turned on Joe. And I think Joe Frazier never forgave him for that.
Yeah. Well, the fights were never just about the fight. Muhammad would frame every one to make the stakes bigger than just a fight. And he was a master at that. I mean, the promoters would say he does our job better than we ever could, right? And so it's a battle between Islam and Christianity when he faces Floyd Patterson. Sometimes it's a battle about who's more authentically Black. And as Dave Kindred says in the film, he thought that Muhammad was most brutal before the fight in the way that he described his opponent, when he was maybe the most concerned about the outcome, right? And Frazier kind of had his number. I mean, they were, as Harold, I'm sure, could tell us, they really were tremendous rivals, and they brought out a certain spirit in each other. I mean, it was to the death. It didn't matter whether there was a title on the line or not. And in the run-up to those fights, as he was framing them, I think he would try to win the fight or the first round before they ever got in the ring by psyching out the opponent. And he was brutal with Joe, and he used the kind of language that a white racist would use to describe a black man, right? And it's, I mean, as Todd Boyd says in the film, this is the ultimate conscious black man, and he's using that type of language. It's a little hard to process. Joe did not appreciate it. And later in life, as Muhammad was making sense of his life many years later, he did say that he wished that he had handled that differently, that he realized that it had hurt Joe, that it was not all in good fun, and that it wasn't just about getting ready for the fight. And, you know, a lot of fighters would say, like Ernie Shavers told me, you know, there was my life before I fought Muhammad Ali and my life after, and I mattered after I fought Muhammad Ali. But for Frazier, it wasn't that. He carried that around for a long time, and he never could quite forgive Muhammad. And when they get into a tussle in front of Howard Cosell on live TV, you can hear Howard going, you know, I've seen this before. This time it seems for real. Like if they hadn't been yanked apart, they might have had the third of 4 fights on set right there. And so it was real, that animosity. And I think Joe really felt it, and Muhammad really gave it to him. And maybe Muhammad didn't grasp soon enough how hurtful it was to Joe.
Harold, talk about his ability to get into the head of his opponent.
Well, you know, I just wanted to elaborate on what David was just saying. Joe Frazier, man, was one of the nicest people that I've ever met, and really a great human being, man. And I had a chance to interview Joe, George, and Muhammad Ali. And Joe, you know, really never forgave Muhammad Ali for the way he treated him, because Joe looked out for him. And I remember when my wife Addie and I went up to Philadelphia for a reunion. This is the first time they ever tried to put a reunion together for Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. And we went up to hear Joe Frazier's kids were behind it. And man, Bert Sugar, myself, Hattie, and Jim Brown, we all met up there, and everybody had a great time. But still, man, there was animosity still in the air. You could feel it. It was still there, man. Joe just would not forgive Muhammad Ali. And I asked the champ, there was 2 questions I asked him. Joe Frazier and, of course, Malcolm X. He said, man, he wished he could have done had a do-over for both of those folks, because Malcolm was like a brother to him, man. And Joe treated him good. You know that. And it was just one of those things. He was a showman, and he got into people's heads. That was part of his whole persona, was to get inside of people's heads. And he was able to get inside of a lot of people's heads, man.
Well, I'm going to add to Charles, to what Harold was saying. We try in the film to offer a backstory for his opponents, and we do a takeout on Sonny Liston, and we explain where Floyd Patterson came from. And we certainly tell the audience where Joe Frazier came from. A lot of those boxers have similar stories in terms of their upbringing. They don't come from much. Muhammad comes from a kind of version, a black version of middle class in segregated Louisville. I mean, he had a bicycle as a kid. When he got his bicycle, Joe Frazier was already working in the fields as a sharecropper. And then he leaves, he's not in school anymore after 12 or 13 years old. He moves up to New York first, I think, and then to Philadelphia, and he works in the slaughterhouse. And he's up to blood in his ankles, and in the evening he's training. And so they have very different experiences, Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. But Muhammad is able to speak about their blackness and suggest that his is a more authentic black experience. He's not afraid to call Ernie Terrell and Uncle Tom. I mean, he makes this complicated in advance of the fight, and it sometimes angers his opponents. And if they don't know how to handle that, maybe he's already got them before they go in the ring. And I don't think it affected Joe Frazier in the same way it might have affected others, but I think it was cruelest when he talked that way about Joe Frazier.
Well, let me talk about the first fight between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. For once again, I have to relate it to my generation. There was no gray line. In other words, you were either for Muhammad Ali or you were against Muhammad Ali. And that wasn't just in the white community, it was in the black community. And one of the things that I'm always reminded of, the church ladies hated Muhammad Ali because he was no longer Christian. Okay. Yeah. There was a middle class African-American community who saw him as somebody would call the uppity N-word. Okay. And then there were people who were coming of age in the Black Power movement, and they saw him as the personification of what the Black Power movement could be. Harold, let's talk about that fight first of all. It's in New York City. It's got everybody under the sun there who thinks there's somebody at this fight. Frank Sinatra is there. And then
Frank Sinatra couldn't even get a ticket. He had to go in as a photographer. He couldn't get a ticket, man. Frank Sinatra, Mr. Blue Eyes.
Right. And then, of course, that was one of the most challenging fights for Muhammad Ali. Most people don't remember this, but Joe Frazier knocked down Muhammad Ali.
The 15th round, that's what won him the fight. The 15th, because that fight was close all the way up to that 15th round. When he knocked Muhammad Ali down, I knew right then, because I was betting Muhammad Ali. I just say, hey, that's it. And that's how that decision came back too, out of that 15th round, man. That was a brutal fight, man. Those Joe Frazier fights, they were brutal. Muhammad Ali had some brutal fights, man. And
were those 20-round fights, if I remember correctly? How many rounds was it?
15.
15 rounds.
15, yeah, that's 15
it seemed
rounds,
like 20. Because they went on and on and on and on and on. But I want to get to an audience question. And Harold, this is for you. Somebody wants to know, how did Muhammad Ali earn the title of the Chosen One?
He gave me that title as the Chosen One because in just before he went to Zaire, I was going back and forth up to Muhammad Ali's camp in Deer Lake, and there'd be a lot of reporters around. People, that was the spot to be if you could get there. And so I'm standing out while he's giving his press conference, and all of a sudden Rahman comes out to get me. He said, the champ wants you to sit on the rock with him. I said, huh? So I went up there to sit on the rock and conduct the press conference, man. And of course, Pat Patterson was standing over our shoulders. I got that picture. And that's when I, felt like, man, I was special to him, man. And then there were other things, man, like Jackie Jones told you about when I went to pick Muhammad Ali up at the airport. I think it was 1975. DC had named him the athlete of the century. So Jimmy Denson, who was president of the DC Chamber of Commerce, called me. He said, Harold, your man is coming to town. I need for you to go out to National Airport and pick him up. I said, okay, no problem. So I went out to National Airport, and there was Veronica, right? Mm-hmm. Muhammad Ali is over by the baggage counter. He over there doing magic tricks and all kinds of stupid stuff. So Veronica said, Harold, will you get that damn food? So I stood up on the chair and I said, hey, champ, come on, we got to go. You know what he said? Cool it, Harold Bell. I'll be there when I get there. But that was him, man. He was consistent. It was never no surprise to me. So now we get to DC and we got 5,000 people in a ballroom standing all around, man. And I've been with him all day. I had to go home and get my wife and bring her back. So now Mayor Washington is presenting him with this big plaque. And so he stopped Mayor Washington. He said, hold it, Mr. Mayor. He said, do you know Harold Bell? So my wife looked at me. I don't know what's going on. So he said, Harold, stand up. Harold, stand up. So I stood up, man. He said, Mr. Mayor, do you know Harold Bell? So the mayor looked out there. He said, yeah, who don't know Harold Bell? He said, that's my friend. Do you understand? That's my friend. And I don't want anything to happen to Harold Bell on your watch. Do you understand, Mr. Mayor? The mayor shook his head. Yes, champ, I understand. He said, what did he say, Hattie? You're not as dumb as you look. Boy, the crowd went, wow. Only Muhammad Ali could get away with something like that.
What a great story.
I got a lot of great memories, man. A lot of great stories, man. That was my brother. Brother.
Well, first and foremost, I have a couple of more questions I'm going to get to. But I want to get to his internationalism, David. He becomes this international figure. He's literally fed it all across the world. Talk about that part of his life, if you will.
Yeah, I think after he defeats Sonny Liston, you can trace this in the papers. You know, this is February of '64. Every paper is writing about him every day. He can't go anywhere without a pack of journalists following him. He's visiting Malcolm X in Harlem. He's flying to Chicago to see the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He's back in Louisville. There are parades here. There are replays of the fight. He's meeting with dignitaries at the UN. I mean, it's astonishing. If you go onto ProQuest, which has the access to all these newspapers, it's every paper. There's a tiny town in Iowa that can't get enough of which in the local newspaper of what he's doing next. It's amazing. By May of '64, his handlers, it's a little hot. They decide to take him to Africa. And we looked at the clip this evening. And he arrives there and he brings entire nations to a halt. He's already so well known over there. And this would go on for the rest of his life. And maybe I think at a time in the mid 80s and into the 90s when perhaps he was slightly forgotten in this country. He had retired. He had been overrun by this crippling disease, Parkinson's, which had slowed him down and quieted him. And he has this reemergence at the Olympics in '96 where people are reminded of what an important figure he is and all the feelings that they had about him in the 60s and 70s and 80s. They're thinking about him. They're thinking about themselves. But all that time, he's going into the Muslim world. And again, nations are stopping to greet him. He's going to Pakistan. He's going to Afghanistan. He's going to the Middle East. It's extraordinary. He was the most beloved man on the planet. And I think going into this project, I didn't appreciate that. I understood he could bring traffic to a stop on a Manhattan street corner anytime, but I didn't know the reach that he had. 2 billion people watched him fight Larry Holmes. And I think he died more beloved than anybody on this planet.
Sir, I want to get to you, but one of the things I know about those Muhammad Ali fights, I found myself going to a globe trying to figure out where the heck is he fighting. I know when I heard the word Zaire, I was like, I think that's in Africa. And then when I heard he was going to fight Manila, I said, I think that's in the Philippines. And literally, you know, the boxing world was focused on New York and Las Vegas. You might get a few cities in between, it's like a Chicago, but that global kind of, I'm going to take you to a place where you've never been before. I'm assuming you capture some of that, don't you?
Yeah, and the significance of those two fights in particular, the Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire and the Thrill in Manila, are both, you know, in both of those cases, you have dictators who are looking to bring positive international attention to their countries and to their regimes. And so it's actually kind of complicated because you have in Mobutu, the leader in Zaire at that time, you know, he is siphoning money out of the country. He is treating his opponents in terrifying ways. And people in his country are suffering, but he puts up this money and stages this event that is a global, incredible, memorable event. And, you know, Ali and Foreman both were prepared to take his money and do that fight. And there was huge significance to the fact that these two Black Americans were fighting in Africa in that moment. And I think that was important to them. Certainly Ali talked about the significance of that and why that was important to him. You know, he said, this is my real home. This is my home country, you know. And so that was a hugely important moment. And it did successfully bring a lot of attention there. But it's always complicated because in both of those cases, you have these dictators who are using the fight also for their own ends.
Harold, I want to talk to you about his diagnosis with Parkinson and how that changed him, because a lot of people kind of knew it. I was in West Palm Beach when he did his last fight in the Bahamas, and he was literally punch drunk by the time that fight was over with. And you know, how many blows can you sustain? Were you aware of that issue of, you know, I know you know this, a lot of fighters stay too long in the business?
Well, you know, I wasn't on top of it like that, but I saw him slowing down, man, and I saw him losing his speech. And the last time that I saw him, man, was in Washington D.C. when Layla, his daughter, fought for the championship, and that was who headlined that card was Mike Tyson. And that was the night that Mike Tyson sat on his stool and would not come out. He quit. And of course, Muhammad and Rahman, everybody was there. And there was some politics going on, and they wouldn't let me down the ringside. I was trying to get all my friends in the fight. And so the fight was over. He was coming back to his limousine. And, man, people were following him, man. And one of his guys ran up to me and said, Harold, the champ is coming this way. See that black limousine over there? Stand by the limousine because he wants to see you. So I went over and stood by the limousine, man, and to see him, you know, his speech slurred. And when he saw me, and they pushed everybody back, man. He hugged me, man, and that was priceless, man. That this guy in that condition, man, you know, still loves me, man. And that was really one of the most hurting times of my last time with him, and I'll never forget that, man. That how Parkinson just took him down. Didn't take his mind down. He was still straight, man, as far as his mind was concerned. But the Parkinson had overtaken his body, man, and that was the sad part of that. And to see him take that Olympic torch, you know, that, man, that tops it all. So, yeah, great memories, man. Great memories, Charles.
Harold, thank you so very much for that. And David McMahon and Sarah Barnes, thank you for joining us. Remind us again, David, when it starts on Sunday. Is that correct?
Yep, it'll be on this Sunday at 8 p.m. and again at 10. And then the second episode on Monday, and third on Tuesday, and the finale on Wednesday.
I hope all of our MPT viewers will have an opportunity to see that. And for all of our audience across the world that's on YouTube, I hope you will take an opportunity as well to look at it. I want to thank everybody for joining me. I want to thank Maryland Public Television for allowing me to conduct this conversation. I know it will generate many questions after you see it all. I hope you will share it with your friends, and we want to thank you, and be safe.